My name is Serafina Quinn. For as long as I can remember, my life has been shaped by the quiet, steady principles my father instilled in me, not with lectures, but with his hands. He was a watchmaker, a man who spent his days hunched over a small, sunlit desk, surrounded by the scent of brass and mineral oil. He believed that the true value of a thing wasn't in its flash or its newness, but in its integrity, the honesty of its materials, the precision of its assembly, the quiet, unseen labor that made it reliable. Anything worth doing, he'd murmur, his loupe pressed to his eye, is worth doing with care, Serafina. The world is full of noise. Be the quiet hum that keeps things turning. I carried that ethos with me into my own career. I wasn't a watchmaker, I was a data custodian, a far more modern and less romantic profession. For the past 5 years, I'd worked at Orosphere Innovations, a tech company in the heart of Port Blossom, a city that perpetually smelled of damp earth and blooming roses. Our office, however, was a world apart from the misty, green-draped hills outside. It was a sterile sanctuary of glass walls, white desks, and an almost religious devotion to minimalist aesthetics and corporate wellness jargon. We didn't have teams, we had synergy pods. We didn't have goals, we had empowerment directives. My role was in a small, forgotten corner of the company called the Special Projects Division, which was a polite euphemism for the work no one else understood. I managed the digital archives for a sensitive federal contract with the National Archive and Data Stewardship, NDS for short. It was a vast, intricate library of ecological and historical data, records that required a level of security and meticulous handling that made most people's eyes glaze over. It was invisible work, much like the tiny, whirring gears in my father's watches, but it was essential. I was good at it. I found a deep, quiet satisfaction in the order and precision of it all, in knowing I was the guardian of something important, something lasting. This guardianship came with a unique responsibility. After a rigorous and deeply personal vetting process that had felt more like a soul excavation than a background check, I was issued a stewardship key. It wasn't a flashy badge, but a simple, heavy card of matte gray tungsten, embedded with a secure chip. It lived in a lead-lined sleeve in a dedicated pocket of my bag, a quiet, constant reminder of the trust that had been placed in me. I never spoke of it. Power, like my father's work, was best when it was quiet. The noise at Orosphere came primarily from one source, Camilla, our head of people and culture. She was a woman who moved through the office like a weather system, all bright, manufactured sunshine and sudden, chilling drafts. Camilla believed fervently that a company's soul could be curated through aesthetics. She had orchestrated the transition to a completely open-plan office, mandated the use of a specific brand of calming essential oil diffusers, and wrote long, breathless emails about living our brand. Her vision for Orosphere was sleek, modern, and uniformly synthetic. And that was where I, in my quiet way, became a problem. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried on the digital breeze of Camilla's latest initiative. The subject line was simply, a fresh perspective for a vibrant future. It was a memo, shimmering with pastel infographics, announcing a revised dress code. It spoke of forward-facing fabrics, streamlined silhouettes, and the importance of a cohesive visual identity. Buried in the corporate poetry was the real message, a prescriptive list of approved materials, polyester blends, microfiber, rayon, nylon. Natural fibers, it noted with a kind of gentle condescension, could project a dated and inconsistent energy. I read it while sipping my tea, the steam warming my face. I looked down at my own clothes. I was wearing a pair of dark, tailored linen trousers and a soft, cream-colored silk blouse. On the back of my chair hung my favorite blazer, a beautiful piece of Donegal tweed, flecked with the colors of a stormy sea. It had been a gift to myself after I received my stewardship key, a tangible symbol of my own quiet success. It was well-made, timeless, and honest. According to Camilla's new scripture, it was also obsolete. I knew, with a certainty that settled in my stomach like a cool stone, that this memo was a letter addressed to me. No one else in the building dressed as I did. The engineers wore hoodies and jeans, The sales team wore wrinkle-free suits that shone under the fluorescent lights, and the marketing department dressed in whatever fast fashion trend was currently cycling through their social media feeds. I was the anomaly, the quiet dissenter in wool and linen. The conflict wasn't really about fabric. It was about a clash of philosophies. Camilla's world was one of disposable, reproducible perfection. Mine was one of enduring, imperfect character. And in the silent, white-walled world of Orosphere, there apparently wasn't room for both. I closed the email, took a deep, steadying breath, and turned my attention back to the encrypted archive. I had work to do. Real work. A few days passed in a state of quiet tension. I continued to wear my clothes, the ones that felt like an extension of myself, solid, breathable, and real. I felt the subtle shift in the office atmosphere. The glances lingered a moment too long. The smiles from Camilla's closest acolytes, particularly a junior HR coordinator named Nina, were a little too bright, a little too sharp at the edges. The first direct encounter happened on a Friday. I was at my desk, deep in the meticulous process of migrating a protected dataset, a task that required unbroken concentration. The scent of lavender and sandalwood announced Camilla's arrival before she spoke. "Serafina, hi," she said, her voice a warm, smooth purr. Nina hovered a few feet behind her, clutching a tablet like a shield. I finished the line of code I was writing before looking up. I didn't turn in my chair, just tilted my head. "Camilla, I just wanted to float by and connect about the new style guide," she said, gesturing vaguely at my outfit, a simple, navy blue merino wool dress. "We're also energized by the chance to create a more unified, dynamic look for the team." I read the memo, I said, my voice even. "Wonderful. So you know we're really encouraging everyone to embrace those more modern, innovative fabrics. It's about presenting a single, powerful front to our partners and clients." Her eyes flicked to my dress and her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Wool is a beautiful classic, of course, but it doesn't quite capture the vibrancy we're aiming for. The word hung in the air between us, vibrancy. It was a word that meant nothing and everything. It was a shield for her personal preference, a weapon disguised as a corporate value. "My work isn't client-facing, Camilla," I said calmly. "And my contract with NDS is more concerned with data integrity than fabric integrity." A flicker of annoyance crossed her face before being smoothed over with another layer of professional warmth. Of course. But we're all one team, aren't we? It's about the collective energy. Just something to be mindful of." She smiled, a perfect, empty gesture, and glided away, Nina trailing in her wake like a pilot fish. I watched them go, then turned back to my screen. My heart was beating a little faster than I liked. It wasn't fear, it was a deep, weary frustration. It was the feeling of being seen, but not understood. My father had taught me that the quietest parts of a machine were often the most important. At Orosphere, it seemed the quietest people were simply obstacles to be streamlined. That evening, I went home and took out a small, leather-bound journal. I didn't write about office politics. I wrote about my father's workshop. I described the smell of the cleaning solution he used, the satisfying click of a watch case snapping shut, the way he'd hold a finished piece to his ear, a look of profound contentment on his face. I wrote about the tweed blazer hanging in my closet, about the weaver who had twisted those threads together, about the history held in the pattern. I was reaffirming my own values, shoring up my own foundations against the rising tide of synthetic vibrancy. I was reminding myself who I was. The following week, the pressure intensified. It was no longer just about Camilla. A subtle current of exclusion began to run through the office. I was accidentally left off the email for the weekly project sync. When I approached Evan, my direct manager, about it, he shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. Evan was a man who seemed to be allergic to conflict. His entire management style was based on placating the loudest person in the room, which was invariably Camilla. Yes, Serafina. Sorry about that," he'd mumbled, staring at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "Things are moving so fast, you know. Wires get crossed." "It's the third time this month, Evan," I said, keeping my voice level. Well, Camilla is just really trying to foster a new kind of collaborative spirit, he offered, as if that explained anything. Maybe just try to get on board with the new initiatives? It makes things smoother for everyone. He wasn't asking me to do my job. He was asking me to disappear. To sand down my edges until I fit neatly into the box Camilla had designed. The breaking point came 2 weeks after the first email. I wore my tweed blazer. It was a gray, drizzly port blossom day, and the soft, sturdy wool felt like a quiet armor against the damp chill. I was making tea in the communal kitchen when Camilla and Nina entered, their conversation halting the moment they saw me. Camilla's eyes went straight to my blazer. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of strained patience, like a teacher dealing with a willfully disobedient child. "Serafina," she said, her voice dropping the pretense of warmth. It was now cool and sharp. "We need to have a serious conversation. That blazer is in direct violation of the updated dress code." "It's tweed," I stated simply. "Exactly," Nina chirped, tapping her stylus on her tablet. Section 3, subsection V, explicitly discourages heavy, textured, or legacy weaves. Legacy weaves. They made it sound like an ancient curse. I felt a surge of something hot and sharp in my chest, not anger, but a profound sense of offense. They weren't just insulting my clothes, they were insulting the craftsmanship, the history, the very idea that something old could still have value. "This is a formal HR matter, Serafina," Camilla continued, her voice gaining strength as she stepped into her official role. "You have been verbally counseled. This is a pattern of noncompliance. It sends a message that you don't consider yourself part of the Aurasphere team." I looked from her face, tight with righteous authority, to Nina's, a mirror of nervous agreement. I thought of my father, his patient hands, the quiet hum of his workshop. I thought of the immense, silent responsibility of the data I protected every single day. And I felt a sudden, calm clarity. "My commitment is to my work," I said, my voice quieter than theirs, but clear and unwavering. "The quality of my work has never been in question. This conversation, however, is." I picked up my mug of tea and walked away, leaving them standing in the sterile white kitchen. I didn't slam the mug down on my desk. I didn't fire off an angry email. I simply sat, held the warm ceramic in my hands, and felt the ground shifting beneath me. The quiet hum was being drowned out by the noise. And I knew, with a deep and somber certainty, that something was about to break. The summons came at 3:12 p.m. the next day. It wasn't an email, but a calendar invitation that simply appeared on my screen. Meeting, HR matter. The location was a small, glass-walled conference room on the 3rd floor, a room colloquially known as the Fishbowl. There were no other attendees listed besides me and Camilla. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with a sense of grim resignation. The final gear was about to click into place. I took a moment to close my files, running the final security log-off sequence for the NDS archive. The system prompted me with the standard daily check-in, a digital handshake to confirm the stewardship key was still active and in my possession. I completed it, the screen flashing a quiet protocol confirmed before going dark. I stood up, straightened my linen dress, and walked toward the fishbowl. The walk felt strangely serene, as if I were moving through water. The usual office chatter seemed muffled and distant. I saw heads pop up over monitors, eyes following me with furtive curiosity. The air was thick with the unspoken knowledge that a corporate drama was reaching its final act. Camilla was already seated at the head of the table, her posture ramrod straight. Nina was beside her, a neat stack of papers arranged in front of her. Across from them sat Mr. Donovan, the Chief Operations Officer, a man whose primary contribution to the company seemed to be signing off on Camilla's initiatives without question. He looked profoundly uncomfortable, his gaze fixed on the polished surface of the table. "Serafina, thank you for coming," Camilla began, her tone formal and devoid of its usual syrupy coating. I inclined my head and sat down, placing my hands calmly on the table in front of me. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were observing a scene from a great distance. "We're here today to discuss your ongoing employment at Aurasphere," Camilla said, getting straight to the point. Unfortunately, despite repeated coaching and clear communication of company policy, you have demonstrated a continued resistance to aligning with our corporate culture and standards. Nina slid a document across the table. At the top, in bold, slightly aggressive font, were the words, "Notice of involuntary termination." This decision, Camilla continued, her voice ringing with rehearsed finality, is based on your direct insubordination regarding the company dress code and a broader pattern of behavior that has been deemed detrimental to team cohesion. I looked down at the paper. It listed dates and incidents, the verbal counseling about my wool dress, the public defiance regarding my tweed blazer. It used phrases like failure to integrate and misalignment with core brand values. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction, a narrative woven from thin air to justify a personal vendetta. There was no mention of my performance reviews, which were exemplary. There was no mention of the flawless security audits on the NDS contract. There was no mention of the millions of dollars of federal funding that contract brought into the company, a contract I alone managed. A quiet space opened up inside me, a hollow feeling of disbelief. Not at their cruelty, but at their short-sightedness. It was like watching someone dismantle a priceless clock because they didn't like the color of its face. "So, to be clear," I said, and my voice was steady, much to my own surprise. "I am being fired because of my clothes." Mr. Donovan shifted, clearing his throat. "It's a matter of policy, Serafina. We have to be consistent." "This isn't just about clothes," Camilla cut in, her cheeks flushed with victory. "It's about respect for the company's vision. A vision you clearly do not share." I looked at the three of them, Camilla, radiating smug triumph, Nina, looking pale and nervous, and Mr. Donovan, wishing he were anywhere else. And in that moment, I wasn't hurt. I was profoundly sad for them, for the smallness of their world. I stood up slowly. "I see. Someone from IT will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings," Camilla said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Company property, including your access card, must be surrendered." "Of course," I said. I paused at the door and looked back at them. I felt a sudden, solemn duty to say one more thing, not for my own sake, but for the sake of the work I was leaving behind. The NDS contract has a strict daily stewardship protocol. The security key I hold requires a digital handshake every 24 hours. Terminating my access will trigger a security alert. Camilla waved a dismissive hand. "IT will handle all the technical details." She didn't understand. She thought it was a password, an access card, something that could be simply handled. She had no concept of the deep, binding trust that the stewardship key represented. I gave a small sad nod. "I'm sure they will." The walk back to my desk was a blur of averted eyes and sudden, intense interest in computer screens. The box they gave me was small and flimsy, a pathetic vessel for 5 years of my professional life. Evan was there, hovering awkwardly. "Serafina, I'm sorry it came to this," he stammered. "Are you Evan?" I asked, my voice gentle. He had no answer. He just gave a helpless little shrug and retreated to the safety of his office. I packed with deliberate care. A small, carved wooden bird my father had made me. A framed photo of the Oregon coast. A few treasured books. And finally, from its secure sleeve, the matte gray stewardship key. I held its cool, heavyweight in my palm for a moment. It felt like I was holding a promise I was now being forced to break. I slipped it into my bag. The IT escort, a young man who looked barely out of college, watched me with sympathetic eyes. As I stood to leave, my gaze fell on my dark monitor. The termination of my network credentials would have already been processed. The digital handshake was now impossible. The clock was ticking. As the elevator doors slid shut, I didn't feel anger or shame. I felt a vast, echoing silence. The quiet hum had stopped. And I was the only one in the entire building who knew what that meant. I was sitting on a low bench in the building's sterile, echoing lobby, waiting for the rain to let up before making the final walk to my car. The cardboard box of my former life sat beside me. I was tracing the rim of my paper coffee cup, lost in a quiet reverie of what-ifs and what-nows, when the main glass doors slid open with a decisive swoosh that cut through the lobby's hushed atmosphere. Two figures entered, a man and a woman, and they moved with a kind of focused calm that immediately set them apart from the usual parade of couriers and job candidates. They wore simple, dark, well-tailored suits that didn't announce a brand so much as a purpose. They scanned the lobby not with idle curiosity, but with a swift, comprehensive assessment. On each of their lapels was a small, discreet pin, a silver circle enclosing a stylized sequoia tree, the insignia of the National Archive and Data Stewardship. My breath caught in my throat. It had happened faster than I'd anticipated. The broken link in the chain of trust had sent a silent, instantaneous alarm to the heart of the system. The woman, who had her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, approached the reception desk. "We are here to see Silas Vance, your CEO," she said. Her voice was low and clear, without inflection, yet it carried an undeniable weight of authority. Immediately, the receptionist, a young woman named Sophie, fumbled with her headset. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance is in a planning session. Do you have an appointment?" The man, who was slightly taller and had a grave, steady face, simply looked at her. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence itself was an answer. Sophie's professional poise dissolved. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. I remained on the bench, perfectly still, a spectator at the unfolding of my own strange fate. The humiliation of the past hour, the sting of being dismissed over something as trivial as tweed, began to recede, replaced by a jolt of cold, clear adrenaline. This was no longer about Camilla's aesthetic preferences. This was about a breach of federal protocol. The adults, as they say, had entered the room. The lobby grew unnaturally quiet. A few employees trickled out of the elevator, took one look at the two figures standing like statues by the reception desk, and scurried away. Within 2 minutes, the executive elevator chimed. The doors opened and Silas Vance, the CEO, emerged, flanked by a pale-looking Camilla. Silas's usual air of breezy, untouchable confidence had been replaced by a tense, guarded confusion. He saw the NDS pins and his face tightened. "Can I help you?" he asked, forcing a smile. "I'm Miss Finch, this is Mr. Vale," the woman said, her voice betraying no emotion. "There has been a security alert triggered on the stewardship key assigned to this location. We need to verify its status and speak with the assigned custodian, Serafina Quinn." Silas's eyes darted around the lobby and landed on me. For a moment, he looked utterly bewildered, as if he couldn't connect the woman on the bench with the name that had just been spoken with such gravity. Camilla followed his gaze, and when she saw me, the color drained from her face. A flicker of dawning horror, of a terrible miscalculation, crossed her features. Silas recovered quickly, pasting on his CEO smile. He walked towards me, his steps a little too quick. "Serafina, there you are. We were just having a follow-up chat." "A misunderstanding." He stopped in front of me, looking down at the box. He gestured vaguely towards the elevators. "Why don't we all go up to my office and clear this up?" I looked up at him, at his desperate, frantic energy, and felt nothing but a distant pity. I didn't stand. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Silas," I said, my voice soft, but carrying in the silent lobby. "As of an hour ago, I no longer work here. You'll have to speak with Camilla. She's the head of people and culture. She handled my termination." I watched the words land. Silas's face went slack with shock. He turned to look at Camilla, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Miss Finch and Mr. Vale exchanged a single, brief look. It was all they needed. "Mr. Vance," Miss Finch said, her voice cutting through the tension like glass. "Your company has just terminated the employment of a federally vetted data steward without notifying our office. You have broken protocol. We need to see her. Now." Silas's composure finally shattered. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes wide with panic. He looked from the implacable agents to me, the quiet woman with the cardboard box, and seemed to finally grasp the scale of the disaster. "Serafina," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Please. There's been a terrible mistake. Of course we want you back. Name your price. A raise, a promotion, a new title. Anything. The whole lobby was listening now. The receptionist was frozen, her hand hovering over her keyboard. And in turn, halfway to the door, had stopped to stare. This was the moment. The culmination of all the small slights, the whispered condescension, the arrogant dismissals. I could have savored it. I could have twisted the knife. But I thought of my father, his quiet dignity. Revenge was just more noise. Self-respect was the quiet hum. I stood up, picking up my box. I looked directly at Silas, my gaze calm and clear. My peace of mind is not for sale, I said. Then I turned to Miss Finch and Mr. Vale. I'm Seraphina Quinn. I have the stewardship key here in my possession. It is secure. Miss Finch gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Miss Quinn, would you be willing to accompany us? We need to file a full report. Of course, I said. As I walked towards the glass doors, flanked by the two agents, I passed Camilla. She was standing frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and terror. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was staring at the space where I used to be, as if she could finally see the ghost of the enormous, vital role I had played, a role she had erased out of sheer, petty ignorance. I didn't offer a parting glance. I didn't need to. The silence left in my wake was more damning than any words I could have spoken. We stepped out of the building into the cool, rain-washed air of Port Blossom. The sky was beginning to clear, and a sliver of watery sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the wet pavement. It felt like the world was breathing again. You handled that with remarkable composure, Miss Quinn, Mr. Vale said, his voice surprisingly gentle as we walked toward a nondescript black sedan parked at the curb. I believe in letting things speak for themselves, I replied, shifting the box in my arms. In the end, the truth usually does. Miss Finch paused before opening the car door and turned to face me. Her expression was serious, but her eyes held a spark of something that looked like respect. The breach was logged the instant your network access was severed. The termination of a steward without a pre-authorized handover is one of the most serious flags in our system. Aurasphere's contract is now under immediate and full review. She let that sink in for a moment. Their eligibility to act as a custodian for federal data is, as of this moment, suspended. I nodded, absorbing the weight of it. It wasn't a victory. It felt more like a sad, inevitable balancing of the scales. A fine, intricate machine had been broken by careless hands, and now it had to be taken away for repair. The work remains, Miss Quinn, Miss Finch continued. The data still needs a steward. NDS often engages independent consultants for oversight and management, especially during transitional periods like this. People with proven track records and the right temperament. She reached into her coat and handed me a simple, elegant business card. It was made of thick, cream-colored stock, bearing only her name, a phone number, and the embossed NADS Sequoia. We would like to have a conversation with you next week, if you're amenable, she said. About a new role. A different kind of role. One where the only thing that matters is the integrity of the work. I looked down at the card in my hand, then back at the glass tower of Aurasphere. I could see the frantic, blurred shapes of people moving behind the windows on the executive floor. They were dealing with the noise, the chaos they had created. And I was here, in the quiet, clean air, holding an invitation to continue the work that mattered. I got into the car, placing the small box of my past on the seat beside me. As the sedan pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore. My father had taught me that a well-made thing is built to last. It was a lesson about watches, but it was also a lesson about character. In the end, the flimsy, the fashionable, and the false will always break. The things with integrity, however quiet, endure. The car moved smoothly through the city streets, toward a future I hadn't expected. I felt a sense of profound, quiet calm settle over me. The hum was returning. Not from the outside, but from within. It was the sound of my own steady, resilient heart, keeping time.